The security guards closed in around the elderly man with a mix of suspicion and impatience. Their questions came rapid fire, each one sharper than the last. Why are you here? Do you have family attending? Where are your credentials? They treated him like a threat, a stranger trying to infiltrate a sacred ceremony. The old man stood quietly beneath their scrutiny, his worn civilian clothes and nervous manner making him seem out of place among the sharp uniforms and proud families streaming past. His answers were hesitant, fumbling as he struggled to provide the documentation they demanded. His heart pounded with a mix of anxiety and quiet determination. He wasn't just a visitor. He was a father, proud beyond words, yet invisible to those guarding the gates. Inside, the crowd settled into their seats, unaware of the scene unfolding just beyond the doors, where a humble man fought for a place at the ceremony honoring military excellence. Then, the moment arrived. A voice boomed over the loudspeaker, crisp and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, presenting Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, graduating first in his class." The elderly man's chest swelled with pride as his son's name echoed through the auditorium. The guards, still holding him back, didn't realize they were standing in the way of the father of the ceremony's most honored graduate, an honor earned through sacrifice, sweat, and relentless perseverance. As the crowd fell silent to listen, the truth hung heavy in the air. Sometimes the most important people at these ceremonies are the ones you least expect, standing just outside, waiting to witness their child's triumph and to finally claim their place among the proud. Welcome to Echoes of Honor, where we discover that sometimes the most important people are the ones who seem least likely to belong. Before we continue this powerful story about family pride, military honor, and the barriers that can separate us from our greatest moments, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe these stories about overcoming obstacles to witness our children's achievements deserve to be shared, please hit that subscribe button to join our growing community. Your support helps us celebrate the families behind our heroes. The Army Advanced Individual Training Graduation Ceremony at Fort Sam Houston was scheduled to begin at 1,400 hours on a sweltering Texas afternoon in August. The event would recognize the completion of specialized medical training by 247 soldiers who had successfully completed one of the most demanding educational programs in military medicine, earning them the right to serve as combat medics in units around the world. The ceremony venue, the base's main auditorium, was filled with families who had traveled from across the United States to witness their loved ones receive recognition for completing training that would prepare them to save lives in some of the most dangerous environments on Earth. The atmosphere buzzed with pride, anticipation, and the kind of reverence that accompanies significant military milestones. Security for the graduation was managed by a team of military police who had been briefed on the importance of maintaining strict access control while accommodating the legitimate needs of families attending the ceremony. Their instructions emphasized vigilance and thorough verification of credentials, reflecting the post-9/11 security environment that required careful screening of all personnel entering military facilities. The security team was led by Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, whose responsibility was to ensure that only authorized attendees gained access to the ceremony, while treating all visitors with appropriate military courtesy. Her experience had taught her to be suspicious of anyone who appeared nervous, provided inconsistent information, or seemed out of place among the typical families attending military graduations. Standing outside the main security checkpoint was Carlos Rodriguez, though none of the guards processing credentials recognized his connection to one of the graduating soldiers. At 59, Carlos carried himself with the careful dignity of someone who had spent his life working with his hands, his civilian clothes and obvious working-class background marking him as different from many of the middle-class families attending the ceremony. Carlos had arrived at the base after a grueling 18-hour bus journey from Phoenix, Arizona, where he worked 2 jobs to support his family and had struggled to afford even the basic transportation costs to attend his son's graduation. His presence at the ceremony represented a financial sacrifice that had required him to miss work and stretch his limited resources beyond their normal limits. What made Carlos's situation complicated was his undocumented immigration status, which had prevented him from obtaining the kinds of official identification that military security procedures typically required. His driver's license had expired years earlier, and his fear of immigration enforcement had prevented him from taking the steps necessary to renew it or obtain other forms of government-issued identification. The only documentation Carlos carried was a letter from his son, Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, explaining his father's situation and requesting assistance from base personnel to ensure that his father could attend the graduation ceremony. The letter provided details about Carlos's identity and relationship to Michael, but it lacked the official authorization that security procedures typically required. When Carlos approached the security checkpoint, Staff Sergeant Walsh immediately began the standard credential verification process, requesting identification and documentation that would prove his relationship to one of the graduating soldiers. Carlos produced the letter from his son and explained that he had traveled from Phoenix to attend Michael's graduation as the family's only representative. "Sir, I need to see official government-issued identification," Walsh said, following standard procedures that required photographic identification for all ceremony attendees. "A letter from your son isn't sufficient documentation for base access. Do you have a driver's license, passport, or military ID?" Carlos's explanation of his documentation problems immediately triggered Walsh's security concerns, as his inability to provide standard identification fit the profile of someone who might be attempting unauthorized access to the military facility. His nervous demeanor and limited English skills further aroused suspicion among the security team. "Sir, without proper identification, I cannot authorize your entry to the ceremony," Walsh announced, her tone becoming more formal as she prepared to deny access to someone whose credentials did not meet base security requirements. "You'll need to contact your son to arrange for proper documentation or sponsorship." Other security personnel had noticed the developing situation and moved closer to provide support if Carlos became argumentative or refused to accept the denial of access. Their body language suggested they viewed him as a potential security risk rather than a father trying to witness his son's achievement. Carlos's attempts to explain his situation were hampered by language barriers and his nervousness about dealing with military authorities. His fear of immigration enforcement made him reluctant to provide too much information about his personal circumstances, while his limited English prevented him from clearly communicating the nature of his relationship to Michael. "Please, my son, he graduate today," Carlos said, his accent making his words difficult for the guards to understand clearly. "I come very far. I work very hard to be here. Michael Rodriguez, he my son, he very good soldier." The communication difficulties and Carlos's inability to provide satisfactory documentation led to an escalation of the security situation, with Walsh deciding that a more thorough questioning was necessary to determine whether Carlos posed any threat to base security or ceremony integrity. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside for additional screening," Walsh announced, her decision reflecting both security protocols and her growing suspicion about Carlos's true identity and intentions. "We need to verify your identity and your reason for being on this base." As Carlos was led away from the main checkpoint for additional questioning, he could hear the sounds of the ceremony beginning inside the auditorium. The knowledge that he was missing his son's graduation while being treated as a potential threat filled him with a combination of frustration, sadness, and resignation about the barriers that his immigration status had created in his life. Meanwhile, inside the auditorium, the graduation ceremony was proceeding according to plan, with military officials, families, and graduating soldiers taking their assigned places for the formal recognition of training completion. The program included speeches from senior officers, presentation of awards for academic and leadership excellence, and individual recognition of soldiers who had demonstrated exceptional performance during their training. Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez sat among his fellow graduates, his small stature and youthful appearance belying the academic excellence that had earned him recognition as the valedictorian of his training class. His achievement represented not only personal success, but also the fulfillment of goals that had motivated him since childhood to pursue military service as a path to education and career advancement. As the ceremony's keynote speaker concluded his remarks and the program moved toward individual recognition of outstanding graduates, Michael automatically scanned the family seating area, looking for his father among the crowd of proud relatives. His disappointment at not seeing Carlos was tempered by understanding of the financial and logistical challenges that made attendance difficult for his family. The ceremony's master of ceremonies, Colonel Patricia Martinez, took the podium to announce the academic awards that would recognize soldiers who had demonstrated exceptional performance during their medical training. The first announcement would identify the class valedictorian, the soldier who had achieved the highest academic scores and demonstrated leadership qualities that set him apart from his peers. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to present the Academic Excellence Award to our class valedictorian, Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, who achieved a perfect academic record while demonstrating the leadership qualities that exemplify the finest traditions of Army Medical Corps. Colonel Martinez announced, her voice carrying clearly throughout the auditorium and beyond. The applause that erupted inside the auditorium was audible to Carlos, who was still being questioned by security personnel outside the building. The sound of his son's name being announced as valedictorian hit him like a physical blow, filling him with pride while simultaneously breaking his heart that he was missing this moment of Michael's greatest achievement. Staff Sergeant Walsh, who had been conducting the additional screening of Carlos, heard the announcement through the auditorium's public address system and suddenly understood the significance of what was happening. The man she had been treating as a potential security threat was actually the father of the ceremony's most honored graduate, someone whose presence should have been celebrated rather than questioned. "Did you hear that?" one of the other security guards asked Walsh. "Rodriguez, that's the same name as this guy? You think there's a connection?" Walsh's expression changed as she realized the magnitude of the mistake that was being made. The security procedures that were designed to protect the ceremony were preventing a father from witnessing his son receive the highest academic honor available to graduating soldiers. Inside the auditorium, Michael Rodriguez walked to the podium to deliver the valedictorian address that he had prepared over the past several weeks. His speech would address the themes of service, sacrifice, and the family support that had enabled him and his classmates to complete their challenging training program. "Ladies and gentlemen, fellow graduates and families," Michael began, his voice carrying clearly throughout the auditorium. "We are here today because we chose to serve something greater than ourselves. But none of us accomplished this alone. We succeeded because of the sacrifices made by families who supported us, who believed in us, and who taught us the values that brought us to this moment." As Michael continued his speech, he spoke specifically about his father's influence on his decision to join the military and pursue medical training. "My father, Carlos Rodriguez, taught me that helping others is the highest calling a person can have. He worked 2 jobs his entire life to provide for our family, never asking for recognition or reward. He couldn't be here today, but his example of service and sacrifice is the reason I'm standing before you as a soldier." The irony of Michael's words reached Staff Sergeant Walsh through the auditorium speakers, as she realized that the man being detained outside was the very person being honored by the ceremony's most distinguished graduate. Carlos's absence from the ceremony was being explained to the audience at the same moment that security procedures were preventing his attendance. Without hesitation, Walsh made a decision that prioritized human dignity over bureaucratic procedure. "Sir, I need to apologize," she said to Carlos, her voice carrying genuine regret for the mistake that had been made. "I believe you are the father that Staff Sergeant Rodriguez is speaking about right now. We need to get you inside immediately." The transformation of Carlos from security threat to honored guest happened with remarkable speed as Walsh and her team realized the significance of their error. Rather than continue with standard documentation procedures, Walsh made the decision to personally escort Carlos into the ceremony, understanding that some situations require flexibility and human judgment rather than rigid adherence to rules. "Mr. Rodriguez, your son is giving the valedictorian address right now," Walsh explained as she hurried Carlos toward the auditorium entrance. "He's speaking about you, about your influence on his life and his decision to serve. You need to be there to hear this." As Carlos entered the auditorium, guided by Walsh through side doors that minimized disruption to the ongoing ceremony, he could hear Michael's voice continuing the speech that honored his father's sacrifices and influence. The words reached Carlos just as he was being seated in the family section, creating a moment of perfect timing that seemed orchestrated by fate rather than coincidence. "My father never had the opportunities that military service has given me," Michael was saying from the podium, his voice carrying the emotion of someone speaking about his deepest inspiration. But he taught me that education is the key to a better life, that service to others gives meaning to our existence, and that honor is more important than comfort. The sight of his father entering the auditorium during his speech caused Michael to pause briefly, his composure momentarily shaken by the realization that Carlos had somehow managed to attend the ceremony despite the obstacles that had seemed insurmountable. The recognition between father and son across the crowded auditorium created a moment of connection that transcended the formal nature of the military ceremony. "And I see that my father has just arrived," Michael announced, his voice breaking slightly with emotion as he acknowledged Carlos's presence. "Dad, this achievement belongs to both of us. Everything I am, I learned from you." The spontaneous applause that erupted from the audience reflected their understanding that they were witnessing something more significant than a routine graduation speech. The connection between Michael's words about his father's influence and Carlos's dramatic arrival during the ceremony created a moment that elevated the entire event and reminded everyone present of the family foundations that support military service. After completing his speech, Michael was presented with the Academic Excellence Award by Colonel Martinez, who had been briefed about the security situation and Carlos's last-minute admission to the ceremony. The presentation became even more meaningful with Carlos present to witness his son's recognition for achievements that reflected the values and work ethic that Carlos had instilled throughout Michael's childhood. The reunion between father and son after the ceremony was witnessed by other families and military personnel who understood that they had observed something extraordinary. Carlos's pride in Michael's achievement was evident in every gesture and expression, while Michael's gratitude for his father's attendance reflected his understanding of the sacrifices that Carlos had made to be present. Staff Sergeant Walsh approached Carlos after the ceremony to apologize personally for the security delays that had nearly prevented his attendance. "Mr. Rodriguez, I want to apologize for the confusion earlier. Your son is an exceptional soldier, and it's clear where he learned his values and determination." Carlos's response reflected both his gratitude for Walsh's eventual assistance and his understanding that security procedures existed for important reasons. "Thank you for helping me see my son. This is the most important day of his life, and you made it possible for me to be here." The letter that Michael had written to explain his father's situation became part of the base's records as an example of how family circumstances sometimes require flexible interpretation of standard procedures. Carlos's experience led to policy discussions about accommodating family members whose documentation issues might prevent attendance at important military ceremonies. The 18-hour bus journey that Carlos had undertaken to attend the ceremony was revealed to represent only part of the sacrifice he had made. Missing work to travel to Texas had cost him wages that his family could ill afford, but witnessing Michael's achievement and recognition had made every sacrifice worthwhile. The ceremony's commanding officer, Colonel Robert Shun, personally thanked Carlos for his attendance and for raising a son who exemplified the values of military medical corps. The recognition connected Carlos's parental influence to Michael's military achievement while acknowledging the family sacrifices that made such service possible. Michael's valedictorian speech was later distributed to other Army medical training programs as an example of how personal values and family influence contribute to military excellence. His words about his father's example became part of the inspiration used to motivate future classes of medical soldiers. The security checkpoint that had briefly become a barrier to Carlos's attendance was transformed into a reminder that human judgment must balance security requirements with the recognition of family relationships that give military service its meaning. Walsh's decision to prioritize Carlos's attendance over documentation requirements demonstrated the kind of leadership that makes military procedures serve human needs rather than obstruct them. In the months following the graduation, Michael maintained regular contact with his father for the first time since enlisting, with their relationship strengthened by the shared experience of the ceremony and Carlos's visible pride in Michael's achievements. The graduation had created a foundation for ongoing connection that honored both Michael's military service and Carlos's parental influence. The academic excellence that had earned Michael recognition as valedictorian was traced directly to the work ethic and values that Carlos had instilled through his own example of dedication and sacrifice. The connection between father and son demonstrated how family influence shapes military character and contributes to the success of individual soldiers. Carlos returned to Phoenix with a new understanding of his son's achievements and a sense of pride that would sustain him through continued challenges in his own life. His attendance at the graduation had required courage and determination that paralleled Michael's completion of medical training, demonstrating that family support often requires its own form of heroism. The documentation that had seemed so important to security procedures was ultimately less significant than the human relationships that connected family members to military achievements. Carlos's presence at the ceremony had been validated not by official papers, but by his son's public recognition of his influence and sacrifice. Sometimes the most important moments in military ceremonies occur when families overcome obstacles to witness their loved one's achievements, demonstrating that the bonds between parents and children transcend bureaucratic barriers and documentation requirements. Carlos Rodriguez had faced detention and questioning to witness his son's graduation, but his persistence had been rewarded with the opportunity to hear Michael publicly honor his influence and sacrifice. The valedictorian address that might have been delivered to an audience missing the person it honored most had instead become a moment of public recognition that connected Carlos's sacrifices to Michael's achievements. The speech had honored not just academic excellence, but the family foundations that made such excellence possible. This story was brought to you by Echoes of Honor. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? Someone whose influence shaped your achievements even when they couldn't be present to witness them? Tell us in the comments about the family members who have supported your success from behind the scenes and how their example has guided your own path. And if you think stories like these about family sacrifice and military achievement deserve to be shared, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We'll see you in the next one.